From beyond the veil of the Force, infinite paths stretch before us, choices made and unmade, destinies fulfilled and averted. Today, we explore one such path. What if Anakin Skywalker, newly knighted during the Clone Wars, returned to Tatooine not for revenge, but for justice? What if the Chosen One decided that freedom couldn't wait for permission? The twin suns of Tatooine blazed overhead as Anakin Skywalker's starfighter descended through the upper atmosphere, the heat shimmer making the desert world ripple like a mirage. But this wasn't the return of a hero. This was something the Jedi Order would never sanction, never understand. 21 years before the Battle of Yavin, nearly a year into the Clone Wars and just months after his hard-won knighting, Anakin was about to cross a line that would reshape the galaxy, though not in the way anyone expected. His hands gripped the controls tighter than necessary as Mos Espa materialized below. He'd left this place a child, freed by chance, by a wager, by the will of the Force. He'd returned years later to bury his mother, murdered by Tusken Raiders after years of continued enslavement. And in both instances, he'd left thousands behind. Thousands still wearing the chains, still carrying the detonator implants, still wondering if today would be the day their masters decided they were more valuable dead than alive. The Jedi Council hadn't mentioned them once during his knighting ceremony. Padme's voice crackled through his comlink. She'd remain on Coruscant officially, but her network of loyal handmaidens and connections in the Outer Rim had made this possible. The routes are clear. The Republic patrols are reassigned for the next 3 days while they redeploy to the Sereno sector. You won't have long once the Hutts realize what's happening, but you'll have enough time to make a difference. 3 days, Anakin repeated. He could feel his wife's concern through their nascent bond, the worry she carried for him, not for what he was about to do, but for what it would cost him. Padme had spent her entire career fighting the very institutions that turned blind eyes to suffering when it was convenient. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, why the newly minted Jedi Knight couldn't simply move on. He landed the fighter in a canyon outside Mos Espa, the same type of ravine where he'd once raced pods for Watto's profit. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been the lucky one, the boy who got away. But luck shouldn't determine freedom. The slave quarters hadn't changed. Anakin moved through them like a ghost, his Jedi robes replaced with the sand-covered wrappings of a moisture farmer. But there was no hiding his presence in the Force. He could feel them. Hundreds of presences, dimmed by exhaustion and hopelessness, concentrated in the compounds surrounding the city, more than he remembered. The Clone Wars had created opportunities for the Hutts and other crime lords. While the Republic's attention focused on separatist threats, the Outer Rim had become even more lawless, even more cruel. He found them in a converted hangar on the eastern edge of Mos Espa. 43 beings, humans and Twi'leks mostly, fitted with explosive collars that the Masters had upgraded since Anakin's childhood. The detonators were now remote capable, controlled by devices the slavers wore on their belts. A failsafe, they called it. Insurance. An Aqualish overseer was making rounds, his translator droid following behind. Anakin watched from the shadows, breathing steadily, finding the calm that had eluded him for so long. This wasn't rage. This wasn't the dark side calling. This was clarity, bright and sharp as a lightsaber blade. Enjoying our alternative Star Wars universe? Consider liking and hitting the hype button to show us your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more mind-bending tales from the Star Wars universe. When he moved, it was with the precision Obi-Wan had drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. The Overseer's blaster was in Anakin's hand before the creature could process the blur of motion. The translator droid's memory was wiped with a thought, its circuits scrambled. The detonator controls, all of them keyed to every collar in the compound, floated gently into Anakin's palm. "You're going to deactivate these," Anakin said quietly. His lightsaber wasn't ignited. It didn't need to be. Every single one. Then you're going to leave Tatooine. The Aqualish's translator scrambled for words. "Do you know who owns?" "I know exactly who owns what. I grew up here. I know which Hutts control which territories. I know which crime lords have arrangements with which Republic officials to look the other way. I know all of it." Anakin's voice remained level, but something in it made the Overseer stumble backward. And I know you have 10 seconds to start unlocking these collars before I decide the Force is done being patient with you. It took 40 minutes to free all 43. Some cried. Some didn't believe it was real. A Twi'lek woman, maybe 30 years old, asked the question they were all thinking. What happens when Jabba finds out? When the Masters come back? Anakin looked at her, and for a moment, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not anger, something colder, something certain. I can't promise they won't try to return, but I'm going to make it as difficult as possible. And there are people on Coruscant working to help, to get you resources, protection, a chance to defend yourselves. It was the truth, at least. Padme had already begun funneling relief supplies through back channels, disguising them as ordinary merchant ships. It wouldn't be enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. He moved through Mos Espa like a storm that had forgotten how to make noise. Each compound fell the same way. Swift, surgical, absolutely certain. He didn't kill anyone. That would have been easy, even satisfying. Instead, he stripped them of weapons, destroyed their control devices, and gave them a choice. Leave Tatooine immediately or face the full weight of what he could bring down on them. Most chose wisely. Those who didn't found their ships disabled, their accounts frozen through Padme's banking contacts, their safe houses suddenly very unsafe. Over the next 3 days, Anakin worked with barely any rest. By the time the sun set on the first day, over 300 beings were free. By the end of the third day, he'd reached Mos Eisley and several smaller settlements. The total wasn't thousands. He was one man, even with the Force. But it was over 800 souls who went to sleep without explosive collars locked around their necks. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see from ground level, was how fast the word was spreading. Freed slaves talked. Spice runners talked. Even the Jawas, in their chittering way, talked. By the time Anakin collapsed in his fighter as the sun set on the third day, the entire planet knew something impossible had happened. Someone had challenged the Hutts. Someone had won, at least for now. And that someone was a Jedi. The Hutts' response came within hours. Encrypted transmissions flooded Republic channels. Threats, demands for intervention, thinly veiled suggestions that the Jedi Order had declared war on legitimate commerce. The Council felt the disturbance in the Force too. A sudden shift in the pattern of suffering on Tatooine, coupled with Anakin's unmistakable signature blazing like a beacon across that distant world. The response from Coruscant came faster than Anakin expected. He made it back to the capital, landing in the private hangar Padme had arranged, when Obi-Wan's message appeared on his personal comlink. Not through official Jedi channels, through the private frequency they'd used since Anakin was a Padawan. Anakin, the Council knows. We need to talk, please. His former master's office in the temple was exactly as Anakin remembered. Organized, meditative, carefully balanced between lived-in comfort and Jedi austerity. Obi-Wan stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the endless cityscape of Coruscant. He didn't turn when Anakin entered. You freed them, Obi-Wan said quietly. As many as you could reach. The Hutts are screaming about it from Nal Hutta to the core. Yes. Without authorization, without consulting the Council, without considering the political ramifications. I considered them. Anakin moved to stand beside his former master. I considered that the Republic has no jurisdiction on Tatooine. I considered that the Jedi Order has had centuries to address slavery in the Outer Rim and has chosen not to. I considered that my mother died a slave because no one thought it was important enough to act. I considered all of it, Master. And then I acted anyway. Obi-Wan finally turned to face him. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else. Understanding, maybe. Or fear of understanding. The Council is calling an emergency session. The Hutts have lodged formal complaints. Jabba himself is demanding Republic intervention to restore order. Their version of order. Jabba can demand whatever he wants from Nal Hutta. The people I freed deserve a chance. Anakin! Obi-Wan's voice held a warning. You're talking about reshaping the power dynamics of an entire sector. About undermining centuries of what? Convenient arrangements? Profitable compromises? Anakin felt something hot rise in his chest. but he pushed it down. This wasn't anger. This couldn't be anger. Master, I didn't use the dark side. I didn't kill anyone. I freed people who were living in chains, and I did it as cleanly and mercifully as possible. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Isn't that what the Jedi are for? Obi-Wan sat down heavily. You know it's more complicated than that. Is it? Or have we just decided it is because the alternative would require us to actually do something uncomfortable? The silence stretched between them. Finally, Obi-Wan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. The Council sees a dangerous precedent. A Jedi deciding unilaterally what justice looks like, acting on personal moral authority rather than through proper channels. They're terrified, Anakin, not of what you did, but of what it represents. What does it represent? That maybe the Order has been wrong. They're not ready to face that. The Senate hearing was a masterclass in political cowardice. Padme fought brilliantly, arguing for emergency humanitarian protections for the freed slaves, for Republic resources to be allocated to rebuilding infrastructure on Tatooine, for formal recognition that slavery was incompatible with the Republic's stated values. She marshaled allies, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, a dozen others who'd been quietly fighting these battles for years, and they were quietly defeated. The Hutts threatened economic retaliation. Their shipping lanes carried too much legitimate trade to risk destabilizing. The banking clan, already nervous about separatist sympathies, warned about credit disruptions. Senator Orn Free Ta, whose Rylith constituents included thousands of freed slaves, somehow argued that jurisdiction prevented the Republic from interfering in Outer Rim affairs. Bail Organa said it best, his voice heavy with disgust. We have decided once again that expediency matters more than morality, and we wonder why systems are joining the Separatists. Through it all, Chancellor Palpatine remained carefully neutral. He expressed sympathy for all parties. He called for measured responses. He suggested committees and studies and working groups. And when it was over, when the Senate had effectively abandoned the freed slaves to whatever fate awaited them, he invited Anakin to his office. An unfortunate business, Palpatine said, pouring wine Anakin didn't touch. You acted from the most noble of intentions, and you've been punished for it. I haven't been punished yet. The Council hasn't formally decided. Oh, but they have. Palpatine settled into his chair. They simply haven't told you. You'll be censored, possibly suspended from active duty. Mace Windu is arguing for harsher sanctions. He believes you've demonstrated a dangerous independence of thought. Anakin felt something cold settle in his stomach. How do you know about this? I made it my business to know what threatens those I care about. The Chancellor's smile was grandfatherly, concerned. Anakin, I want you to understand something. What you did on Tatooine? It was necessary. It was right. The fact that it was also illegal, unsanctioned, and politically inconvenient doesn't change that. But it reveals something important about our galaxy. What's that? That institutions, the Jedi, the Senate, even the Republic itself, are only as moral as it's convenient for them to be. They speak of justice and compassion, but when justice requires sacrifice, when compassion costs credits or political capital, suddenly there are very good reasons why we can't act. Very sophisticated reasons. Very adult reasons. Palpatine leaned forward. You cut through all that. You saw suffering and you ended it. That's actual power, Anakin. That's what the Force is for. Not meditation, not restraint. Action. Anakin wanted to argue, wanted to defend the Order, the Code, everything Obi-Wan had taught him. But he couldn't find the words, because part of him, a large part, knew Palpatine was right. The formal censor came down 3 weeks later. The Council stopped short of suspension, largely because Obi-Wan threatened to resign if they went that far. But Mace Windu delivered the verdict personally, and his words carried weight that went beyond the official reprimand. You have shown us that you believe your judgment supersedes the wisdom of the Council, that your moral certainty matters more than the traditions and discipline that have guided the Jedi Order for 1,000 generations. This is the path to the dark side, Anakin. Not because you freed slaves, That act in isolation was admirable, but because you've demonstrated a willingness to place your individual sense of right above everything else. Today, it's freeing slaves. Tomorrow, where does your crusade end? Who else will you decide deserves your intervention regardless of consequences? Anakin stood perfectly still. I understand, Master Windu. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I think you believe you're special, that the prophecy makes you exempt from the rules that bind the rest of us. And perhaps it does, but that's precisely what makes you dangerous. After Mace left, Yoda lingered. The ancient master studied Anakin with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see everything, understand everything, forgive nothing. Proud of you, I should be, Yoda finally said. But afraid of you, I am. See this pattern before I have. The Jedi who knows better, who serves a higher good, who cannot wait for wisdom to guide action. He tapped his stick on the floor. Always it ends in darkness. Always. Then maybe, Anakin said quietly, the Jedi have been asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about whether I'm dangerous. Maybe it's about why the Council finds compassionate actions more threatening than comfortable inaction. Yoda's ears drooped. Already lost you. I fear we have. But he was wrong. Not yet. Not completely. For the next year and a half, Anakin threw himself into the Clone Wars with renewed purpose. He fought on the front lines. He led campaigns that saved millions. And slowly, word spread across the outer rim of a Jedi who'd actually done something. Who'd broken chains instead of just philosophizing about them. On Tatooine itself, the situation remained precarious. The Hutts tested the waters, sending scouts and enforcers to probe whether they could reclaim their territory. Some of the freed slaves organized resistance. Others fled off-world with what little they could carry. A few inevitably fell back into servitude. Different masters, same chains. Without sustained Republic support, without Jedi protection, the liberation Anakin had sparked flickered like a candle in Tatooine's endless wind. But the story spread faster than the reality. Smugglers told stories in cantinas. Freed slaves spoke his name with reverence. On a dozen worlds, people started asking, if Anakin Skywalker could defy the Order to free Tatooine, what else might be possible? The Jedi Council watched this growing legend with increasing alarm. Padme watched with pride and growing dread, understanding that her husband was building something he couldn't control. A symbol that would outlive whatever intentions he'd started with. And Palpatine watched with satisfaction, recognizing the shape of the piece he'd been moving into position for decades. Not a Sith Lord driven by rage or hate, something more useful, something more tragic. A man who'd learned that only absolute power could impose the justice the galaxy's institutions refused to provide. The war ground on. Anakin became increasingly effective, increasingly ruthless in his pursuit of victory. Not cruel, he never enjoyed the violence, but willing to make harder choices than other Jedi would consider. Swift occupations, preemptive strikes, zero tolerance for exploitation of civilian populations. He saved millions, but he left devastation in his wake. The pattern was always the same. Anakin would arrive on a contested world, assess the situation with brutal clarity, and implement solutions that worked, but left traditionalists uncomfortable. On Rylith, he executed captured slavers rather than turning them over to a court system that would let them buy their freedom. On Christophsis, he requisitioned supplies from wealthy merchants rather than let civilians starve while waiting for Senate approval. The Jedi Council saw a tyrant in the making. The clone troopers saw a general who valued their lives. The civilians caught in the war's grinding machinery saw a protector who actually protected. Obi-Wan tried to reach him, to remind him of the balance the Jedi were supposed to maintain. But every conversation ended the same way, with Anakin asking why balance always seemed to mean accepting preventable suffering. By the final year of the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker had become something the Jedi Order didn't have a category for. Not fallen, but not fully one of them anymore either. He still meditated, still followed most of the code, still loved Obi-Wan like a brother and respected the ideal of what the Jedi could be. But He'd stopped believing they would ever live up to that ideal. The campaigns he led in those final months were masterclasses in military efficiency. He coordinated with clone commanders like Cody and Rex with an intuition that seemed to bypass normal tactical doctrine. His connection to the Force grew stronger, sharper, more focused on practical outcomes than philosophical contemplation. He became the Republic's most effective weapon. And in doing so, he became something that frightened everyone who understood what they were looking at. Ahsoka, his former Padawan, saw it when their paths crossed briefly on Mandalore. She'd left the Order, unable to reconcile its failures with her own sense of justice. When she looked at Anakin, she saw someone who made the opposite choice, staying in the Order while rejecting everything it stood for. "You're still fighting for them," she said, "even though you don't believe in them anymore." "I'm fighting for the people they're supposed to protect," Anakin replied. "That's not the same thing." She wanted to argue, wanted to warn him that this path led somewhere dark, but she couldn't find the words because part of her understood. Part of her had walked away for the same reasons that kept them fighting. When the moment came, when Mace Windu stood over Palpatine with his lightsaber raised, ready to execute the Chancellor without trial, Anakin's choice wasn't born from fear of losing Padme alone. It was born from memory, from the realization that Mace was claiming emergency authority to act outside the law, to decide unilaterally what justice looked like. The same authority Anakin had claimed on Tatooine, the same authority the Council had condemned him for using. Except when Anakin had used it, he'd freed slaves. And when Mace used it, he planned to commit murder. "He must stand trial," Anakin said, his voice steady despite the chaos of the moment. "He's too dangerous to be left alive," Mace countered. "He controls the Senate, the courts. There's no justice through legal channels." "Then we're no different than him. We become the thing we're fighting against. This is different. This is necessary." And there it was, the same logic the Council had rejected when Anakin had offered it. Necessary action, emergency authority, the willingness to break the rules when the stakes were high enough. The lightsaber felt light in his hand as he made his choice, not the right choice. He later understood there were no right choices left by then, but the consistent choice, the choice that said institutions were only as moral as the people within them. And when those institutions failed, someone had to act, even if that someone was the Sith Lord who'd been manipulating him all along. The betrayal was swift. The transformation was agonizing. And when Darth Vader rose from the ashes of Anakin Skywalker, Palpatine was ready with his first command: "Execute Order 66. Across the galaxy, clone troopers turned on their Jedi generals. The order that had stood for 1,000 years fell in a single night. And Anakin, no, Vader, became the instrument of their destruction, believing even then that he was choosing action over paralysis, power over impotence. Darth Vader's first decree as the Emperor's enforcer was to outlaw slavery throughout the Empire. Not quietly, not gradually, immediately, absolutely, with Star Destroyers sent to enforce it on every world that had previously claimed Outer Rim autonomy as an excuse. The Hutts were crushed, their compounds destroyed, their resources seized. Slavery in every form the Empire could define became punishable by death. On Tatooine, the scattered resistance that had been fighting for survival suddenly found themselves under Imperial protection. Though the price of that protection became clear soon enough. The freed being celebrated, briefly, because what replaced slavery was conscription, labor quotas, mandatory service to the Imperial machine. The chains were gone, true. The detonator implants were removed, but the freedom that followed looked remarkably like a cage. Just one too large to escape, too complex to fight. Vader walked through an Imperial factory in Rylith one day, watching Twi'leks work assembly lines for fair wages they couldn't refuse, building weapons they'd never wanted. One of them, an older woman whose Lekko bore the scars of old collarburns, looked up at him with understanding in her eyes. "You freed us," she said, not accusing, not grateful, simply stating a fact. And then you made sure no one could ever be free again." Vader said nothing. What was there to say? She was right. He learned the lesson too well. The galaxy couldn't be trusted to do right through persuasion, through democratic process, through the slow working of justice. He learned that from the Jedi who condemned him for saving lives. He learned it from the Senate that had protected slavers for profit. He learned it from every institution that had chosen comfort over courage. So, he built an institution that couldn't choose, that couldn't fail, that would impose order, his vision of order on every system, every world, every being, whether they wanted it or not. He'd freed the slaves of Tatooine, and in doing so, he learned that only absolute power could guarantee any kind of justice, and that absolute power, once claimed, couldn't be surrendered. The boy who'd broken chains had become the man who made new ones, and somewhere in the Force, Qui-Gon wept. The story of Anakin Skywalker was always going to be a tragedy, but in this timeline, it's a tragedy with a different lesson. He didn't fall because he was weak. He didn't fall because he was seduced by promises of power. He fell because he was right, too early, and the galaxy punished him for it. He fell because he learned that compassion without power is meaningless, and that power without restraint becomes the very thing it sought to destroy. He freed the slaves, and he built an empire where everyone was equally unfree. That's the real horror. Not that Anakin became Vader, but that the path from compassionate Jedi to Sith Lord was paved with good intentions, with real heroism, with the kind of moral clarity we're told to admire. The galaxy didn't create Vader by corrupting Anakin. The galaxy created Vader by showing Anakin that corruption was the only language it understood. If you enjoy this journey into an alternative Star Wars universe where destiny takes unexpected turns and balance means something entirely different, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We explore the infinite possibilities hidden within the galaxy far, far away, asking the questions that reshape everything you thought you knew. The Force has many paths. Come discover them with us.